Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Joining Michael on the show today is Elizabeth Harr, who is the managing partner at Hinge Marketing, a branding and marketing firm that specializes in serving professional service firms. She is the co-author of 3 books and speaks regularly around the country on professional services marketing. Now, as you're about to hear, Liz is adamant about first learning to become a great leader and second, surrounding yourself with successful leaders and consultants to help you improve and ultimately grow your business. Now, if you resonate with Liz's sentiment and know just how difficult it is to grow your business, good news is that you don't have to go it alone. The Consulting Success team is offering a free, no-pressure growth session call. Here's what we'll tackle together on the call. You're going to dive deep into what makes your situation unique, have a real talk about your business, and whip up a success plan that's tailor-made just for you. We'll help you dodge those frustrating, costly blunders and save you from the headache of trying to figure it all out on your own. And lastly, you'll get ongoing support and accountability that you're going to need, plus join a buzzing community of successful consultants. Because let's be honest, growing a business by yourself can be pretty tough at times. To book your free consulting growth session call, head over to consultingsuccess.com/grow. Again, that is consultingsuccess.com/grow. Okay, so now let me tell you a little bit more about what you're going to learn in today's episode with Liz. First, you're going to learn how to find your niche and become an expert in your field, how to identify the right time to add technology into your company, how to attract and retain top talent within your business, how to build out a successful content plan for your firm, develop yourself into an inspirational leader, and ignite growth within your business by ensuring you are laser focused, plus so much more. Here to share with you her story and insights is Elizabeth Harr. Enjoy.
Liz, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here.
Yes, I'm excited for our conversation. Every time that you and I talk, I learn something, and I'm a fan of what Hinge does in terms of the research that all been doing over the years. It's been fun to collaborate on a few things. Let's get into it. I thought we'd start with the idea of the visible expert. I guess a phrase, a term. You have a new book out as well with that topic, and I feel honored to be part of that book and featured in a section of it. But I'd love if you could just start off and maybe share with everybody, what is a visible expert? What does that kind of mean to you, and why write a book on it? Why do you feel that's so important?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking about it. And by the way, ditto, we love talking with you. We learn something tactical and practical every time we talk. I appreciate that about you. The Visible Expert book is about a specific type of persona that is very successful in professional services. When we say visible expert, we're not just talking about a generic expert. We're talking about somebody who has attained high visibility for a specific area of expertise in the industry that matters to them. It has to have those 3 containers, if you will, in order to meet the criteria of being a visible expert. And why this book? Why now? Because we wanted to provide some insight to leaders out there who are trying to grow and scale either personally or within their firms or their firms. And really the answer is to build brands around expertise, because this is how buyers are buying. You can make your expertise visible, will build your pipeline and help you grow and scale in a profitable manner.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I think it's very important, and it's an area that people often struggle with. I do want to get into your experience and time over the last 12 years at Hinge and how you've built it up. You know, you said when you started, it was 10 people, and then it was much higher. And then now you're about 20 people at the firm. And again, the research that you do, I want to dive into that. But I would love to get your perspective on when you talk about specialization, about expertise, how important that is, especially that's how buyers are buying today. I know that's not just your kind of opinion, right? It's based on research and data because that's what you guys really, that's the foundation of everything that you do. But I want to play the devil's advocate for a moment for somebody who's saying, well, do you really have to be an expert? My question is, have you seen examples of firms in the consulting space, professional services, that are more generalists? They don't have deep expertise, or at least they don't put the spotlight on their expertise, and they are still able to be successful. And if so, are they rare? What's your thoughts and experience on that?
I love that question because it's yes, yes, and no, and no. So, yes, I see generalist firms that are successful. And in fact, a lot of firms that become our clients, they're growing at a pretty good clip when they come to us. It's not like they have tanked or anything and they're like, oh gosh, we got to hire an agency to help. It's not that. So yes, the reason to think about building visibility around your expertise is because in order to really get to that next level, not in an accidental way, but in a predictable, sustainable way, that's where you have to pay attention to, okay, I got to grow my firm in a way that aligns with how buyers are buying. You can be the generalist, you can get to a certain point, but at a certain point in time, you're going to compete with specialists. And when you only have price to differentiate on because you can't compete on the specialist, and you're in a different camp. I think that it is important to know that, to your other question, a lot of firms come to the table with sort of a generalist capability and with all authenticity say, hey, we're kind of jack of all trades. Like, that's how we've won business. What I'm talking about with expertise is there's got to be a reason you exist. And there's got to be, within that realm of why you exist, there's got to be some unique angle or some unique perspective you have on tackling the problem that you solve. That's where expertise comes into play. So it doesn't have to be technical expertise. It really is about that piece that I was just talking about.
Yeah. I mean, with clients, I often ask the question of what do you actually want to be known for? Because if you're not clear on what you want to be known for, then you can't expect the market to be clear. And I think your point is a really good one, and one that is worth kind of mentioning again for everybody, is that yes, you can grow as a generalist, but it's almost like having a business that relies just on your network and connections. It can take you pretty far, but at some point you're probably going to wake up and you're going to realize that in order for you to grow in a more stable manner with more predictability and you being able to actually be proactive with it, that's where the expertise comes in. I appreciate you sharing that. Let's shift then to one of your studies, one that you've put out. It's called the high growth study, where you're looking at consulting firms that are growing at a higher rate than the typical firm. There's a lot inside of this to unpack, but I'd love if we could kind of maybe go over a few areas that stand out that you mentioned to me prior. But one thing that I want to note here is that the way that you define these firms is that they're twice as profitable as their no growth peers. And so they've figured out not only how to grow at a faster rate than the typical consulting firm, but they're also growing more profitably, which is that kind of dynamic duo, right? That combination that everybody wants. It's not just growth, top line revenue growth, and saying we're making a lot of quote unquote revenue. They're actually very profitable, that's money in the bank. So let's get into the four. The first area that I have written down here is technology. How does technology play into and factor into growth and profitability?
Yeah. When we talk about technology, we're talking about adoption of technologies that allow companies to really be proficient in a digital landscape, because that's really how we're all operating, communicating, and forging relationships these days. We found in our study that almost a quarter, 23% of high growth consulting firms have already gone through what the industry largely thinks of as a digital transformation. That means they have a high level of maturity in their technology adoption and in their digital proficiency. It means things like it's the difference between operating in paper and spreadsheets versus all your core business systems, marketing and business development, sales. It's all tied in the same system or systems. Everything's talking to each other, and leadership is making solid decisions based on easy access and visibility to key metrics. That's kind of the difference. A quarter of firms probably doesn't sound that impressive to people. But if you think about this number, 6% of no growth firms have done the same, gone through a digital transformation. That's a huge delta. And by the way, digital transformation is no easy feat. It can take years. I think that's a really interesting advantage that those firms have.
Certainly. And I would just maybe add to this that for those that are joining, right, for some of you, you're going to be at the stage with your business where this makes a lot of sense. And it's something that you should be looking into if you haven't already. For others, right, if you're a solo consultant or you're earlier stage, I don't think Liz, correct if I'm wrong, Liz, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but from my perspective, would not encourage somebody who's a solo consultant or earlier stage to try and invest a ton of time and a ton of money into having all the latest technology tools. I know that in our case, if we go back in time, we got to our first $1 million as a business with pretty much spreadsheets. We didn't need a lot of technology to do it. And of course, continue to grow from there and added tools and systems as we built our team. Any thoughts from you on that, Liz, in terms of when does something like digital transformation, or if we may just simplify that, bringing in better systems, processes, technology to scale, grow, and make a consulting firm more profitable? In your mind, when does that become necessary, or when should somebody start thinking about that?
Absolutely. So that's an interesting question. I think the answer when it's right is going to be different for everybody out there. But I love that you asked this question because you're absolutely right. And I've been there myself, where in one of my startups, we were all spreadsheets, and that was perfect for us. To your point, I think the takeaway for small firms would be absolutely not overinvest in different technologies with all these whiz bang features that you're never going to use. Even larger firms shouldn't do that. But anyway, small firms, what we're talking about here is making sure that to the extent that you do use spreadsheets, everything's connected so that you have your sales information. For example, you go to an event, don't just have business cards piled on your desk or it's in your head about who you met. It needs to be visible and centralized somewhere. Spreadsheets are great for that. That's really the takeaway, is centralization, easy access and visibility. Whether you're 1, 5, or 15 people trying to make decisions, you're looking at the same data.
So one example, hopefully this helps people maybe to see this if it's not connecting for them, is taking your example of like the conference or the event and the business cards, or even a spreadsheet by itself. Those are fine. The problem or the challenge is if you don't have a way to use that spreadsheet. So if we think about business development, right, one of the biggest opportunities or missed opportunities for consultants is they don't do enough follow-up. They contact somebody once, twice, maybe 3 times, but they often then don't do much after that. This is where the value of technology, let's say a CRM, right, can help you with reminders to do more follow-up or to take an action that is necessary. So I think even if you're a smaller firm, there is applicable and appropriate technology for you. And if you're a much larger firm, definitely economies of scale and ways to become more efficient. So that's fantastic. All right, let's go to number 2, which is talent. How does talent play into the picture?
I don't like blanket statements, but you always hear war on talent and all this drama around talent. But it's true. It's still pervasive across professional services, where there is this lack of key talent with specialized skill sets. And firms need to be very aware of that, because what are buyers buying? They're buying expertise. Who delivers that expertise? Your people. So it really is important to find good people, retain those good people, and avoid lots of turnover. And so we noticed when we were doing the analysis that we asked some questions around things like firm culture and internal practices. We didn't set out to say, let's explore talent. We found it on accident that high growth consulting firms, it was 8 out of 10 employees of high growth consulting firms reported a very high satisfaction with the overall firm and the culture, whereas only 5 in 10 of the no growth. So when we're talking that kind of scale, that's a big delta.
Huge. That just really speaks to, like, it makes complete sense. If you pause and think about it, how can you be a high growth firm? Well, maybe it's possible actually to be growing quickly, but not for the long term, right? Not sustainably. But if you have people that are buying into the culture, their shared values, they're happy where they are. And if you, as a leader, create that environment, of course, they're going to perform better. Whereas if people aren't bought into those things, or that culture isn't connected or aligned as well as it could be, then it just makes sense that it would really suffer. And I think there's a few areas inside of that you talked about, like how they're actually able to pull that off. What are those?
Right. Because, you might say, well, just pay your people well, and there's a great culture. Everyone's happy. It's happiness and satisfaction at the workplace is way more than how you're compensated. So we found that high growth consulting firms are really proficient in 3 areas. One is transparency. So they're having weekly meetings. The leadership is sharing numbers with the appropriate people. We talked about technology and how that enables people to see things together. So transparency, big thing. The second one where high growth consulting firms are focusing on is authenticity. There's none of this formal, like you can't see behind the shield. That is gone. That's yesterday's thing. And talent wants to be seen. They want to be more than a cog in the wheel. When leadership shows authenticity, it kind of gives permission to everybody else, and the culture just starts to absorb that. That's a very important dynamic and lesson we've all learned post-pandemic, I think, that how much appreciated authenticity is.
I'm just thinking about how this connects to what we do at Consulting Success. And we've been growing, we've been adding more members to the team, just even having some conversations with new prospective people recently. One of the big things that we keep hearing from people just really resonated with your values or what it seems like your culture as I talk to other people on the team. I think that's just so critical. On the sharing numbers part, I mean, yeah, we do this. We have a scorecard that we go through every week as a team, kind of go over those key numbers so we have a good pulse on them. I love seeing that the data supports because it helps me like, okay, I guess we're doing things we're on the right track here, which is great.
That's right. The final area where we see, and this will probably resonate with you and some of the people on the show, but the other area where high growth consulting firms in particular are really shining when they're developing talent is in what we call team development opportunities. And we're not talking about like team building games and stuff. And like, it's not really that because most teams are distributed. What we're talking about is something very interesting. And that is in the way you hold meetings within the firm, having cross-functional teams meet together and be able to hear each other. Then they gain a new level of empathy with each other. Because like, oh, well, I've never met with this team before. And sales now knows what marketing and knows what BD is doing. And it's like this whole new way of building empathy for each other so that when we start the day, we know our colleagues, we understand what they're grappling with, we know what their goals are, and we know where we fit in that overall achievement. Those are the areas where high growth firms are showing proficiency. And I think there's a lot of lessons in there. That's not a hard thing to do. Like you said, this is something that firms can really take and adopt now.
Well, let's come now over to number 3, which is marketing and business development. And I saw here when you sent some of this over that really highlights that high growth firms are leaning a lot more into digital and seeing success there. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that? What are they doing? What stands out on kind of the digital front compared to those that maybe aren't growing as quickly?
In the world of professional services, we all know that we get a lot of business through referrals and relationships. That is never going to go away. That will never go away. There is another channel, and that is the digital channels, online leads. There's a whole strategy around building that. And we find that high growth consulting firms get a third of their leads through only digital sources. They really are paying attention to building their brands in a way that has a relevant digital footprint. They're not just going out and write a blog, any blog, stick it anywhere. It's what's relevant to my audience. Who do I need to be visible to? What do I need to be known for? Like you were talking about, build the brand around that so that you can generate those leads. And this is very insightful because what you talked about earlier, these firms are not just growing, it's profitable growth. And in another study, and we're certainly not the only ones who have said this, but generating leads digitally costs less than in the traditional means where you got a flight and a stay over and all the things that you have to do in that traditional world.
Can we connect that to, I remember seeing a study that you all did maybe last year, the year before, where it showed, I believe maybe it was 20 or 2022 data compared to previous period of time. And I recall that it shows something along the lines that the way the buyers are now making decisions about investing in, for example, working with consultants and so forth, buyers are actually spending more time on online platforms and are now more likely to make decisions based on reading somebody's article or listening to a podcast. I don't know if there's anything that you could touch on there, but just I remember thinking like that makes a lot of sense. So that's very interesting to see.
Yes. The point in that specific data was that clients and prospective clients are judging and vetting firms like yours and mine, whether it's fair or not, through our websites, through our LinkedIn profiles, through articles before they ever pick up the phone. And you know what is scary? Let me tell you a really scary statistic. We talked about referrals. And let's say that someone gives me a call and it says, who does X? And I say, you got to talk to Michael. He is amazing. I've never met a better consultant. You got to call him. Well, out of 10, only 2 in 10 people I refer to you, according to the data, would actually give you a call. 8 out of 10, you will never speak to. Now, you're a bad example because your digital footprint is great. But for those firms whose websites are not up to snuff, who don't have educational content anywhere on their website or LinkedIn, whose messaging is very bland and generic, they're the ones who don't hear from 8 out of 10 referrals. That's a ton of business that's getting left on the table. I say that because it underscores how much buyers are relying on self-education and they're using websites and LinkedIn and all of that. So we have to pay attention.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. I think it's really important for everybody to know. Let's then hit the fourth topic here before we move on, which is strategy. It's a big word, overused. However, in the context of a high growth firm, what stands out? What might a smaller or even a solo consultant or mid-sized firm, what should they be thinking about? Where's the advantage for them inside of strategy?
By strategy, all we mean there is how do you decide how to talk about your firm? What's your positioning? What's your messaging? How do you decide what marketing techniques to employ? How do you decide what channels to be visible in? That's strategy. And what high growth consulting firms do is they do not sit their smartest people around the boardroom table and make those decisions. What high growth consulting firms do is study their audience. How do people learn? Like we were talking about the learning digitally. Well, getting some data and some intel around how these people learn. What events do they attend? What articles and blogs do they read? What publications do they read? What terms are they using to search for what keeps them up at night? That intel is what high growth firms take into the decisions about how to talk about themselves and what channels and techniques. That is huge. And if I were a small firm, larger firms with healthier budgets can hire third-party agency that specializes in that. That's easy. Well, if you're small and you don't have those resources, it doesn't matter. You can do what I refer to as social listening. Go on LinkedIn. It's where your audience is dialoguing, and go to competitors. See what they're posting and what has garnered lots of attention and dialogue. Go to each of your connections, prospective clients and clients alike. Go into their LinkedIn and see where they tend to be liking articles and commenting on articles. What questions are they asked? What language do they use? That intel is free. It does take time. That's a cost, but it's free and it is gold when it comes to understanding what makes your audience move.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I appreciate you sharing that example, especially for the smaller firms or solo consultants that are joining us. Okay, there's a lot there. Of course, I just want to encourage anybody that wants to go deeper into that. Of course, we've touched on just 4 kind of highlights, but there's a lot more in that study. Check it out on the Hinge website. Let's now talk about a little bit more about you, Liz, because I know you said you've been at Hinge for 12 years, right? You did not found Hinge, but you played a key role, right, over a decade plus. More recently, you did kind of take over Hinge and in a positive way. You're now the managing partner. What does that mean? What has that been like for you? Just for those who might be in similar situations where they've been working in a firm for a while. Yeah, what's that been like for you?
Well, it has been quite the journey. It's been as fun, has been challenging, and probably anybody can relate to that. I've been so lucky to be surrounded by partners who adopt a mentor sort of approach. And that's, in fact, how I like to interact with my own colleagues. And I kind of grew up through the ranks of being mentored by the founding partner, Lee Fredrickson. And I went on pitches with him. We have stories of running through the streets of Manhattan, me in stilettos because I'm 5'1" and he had cowboy boots on. He's 6'1" and I still beat him. But anyway, I really learned from him, not just by listening, but just really being with him as he grew Hinge. And so I take a lot of that with me as I'm taking on this new role. But I'll tell you the other thing that I have learned, not just from other leaders at Hinge, but just from my own as I've kind of grown. And it is, as a leader, if you are always the smartest person in the room, you have failed miserably. The true success of a leader is when you are no longer the smartest person in the room, because what have you done? You have mentored all these people. You have allowed them to grow into their own areas of expertise, and you have given them the platform for surpassing you in very specialized areas. So that's the philosophy I take with me as every day, really, as I'm going into this new era of Hinge.
Now, I got to imagine there's been some challenges or something that's been hard in terms of that transition. What stands out for you? Maybe it's something that's been a little bit hard, or just the hardest part, most challenging kind of part of that transition into the managing partner role.
Yeah. Prior to being managing partner, I was in this nice little lane of business development, and I ran that team, and that's what I love. Now, as managing partner, I have to wear multiple hats. And certainly before I was a managing partner, I was a partner. I still wore a lot of hats, but I just had this little lane that was so nice to stay in. Now I have to take on the role of managing different teams and learning what makes them tick. I mean, we talked so much about culture earlier. It's not just about taking over responsibilities and checking the box and you did it. These are people that I'm managing, and learning about what keeps them up at night and how can I create efficiencies internally so that every day they feel like they're doing their best. That's challenging, because when you don't do that all day, every day, and you step into these new roles, it takes time to learn all of that. And that's much more difficult than learning a new technology or figuring out the hard stuff around financials or pipelines.
In your role, as you just kind of shared, you're wearing not necessarily wearing a lot of hats, but you need to be involved in a lot of different things, right? From understanding the finance to the team dynamics, the culture, the values, the business development, having your hand in the research. So you're involved in a lot. And I would imagine, especially earlier stage of the transition, right? It's just a lot of that stuff might be viewed in a bit of a new kind of light. How do you manage all that? Like, I'm wondering, is there either some kind of a framework or process or way that you kind of go about tackling a given day or a given week? Do you block stuff out? Like, just anything kind of tactical or even mindset wise that you found to be helpful?
I really look at my blocks as a weekly construct. And I make sure that Monday mornings, for example, are reserved, at least the early part of the day before I ever meet with any teams, is reserved for reviewing reports so that I come to meetings knowing where we stand. I know what questions. I'm telling you, there's not a bigger waste of people's time when you haven't done that and you're asking questions that really the answer is, well, go back and look at this and then go back and look at that. That's one thing I need to be really disciplined about, is carving out early in the week, early morning time to make sure I'm reviewing important KPIs. The other thing is I have had to really factor into my schedule one-on-one time to meet with people. I didn't have to do that before. And that's another thing that I've found is critical if I'm going to be successful in this role, I really need to have that one-on-one time with different teams. It's no longer just meet with this big team, get the high level, boom, you're out.
Is that a one-to-one with direct reports, or is that a one-to-one with all 20 people? How do you kind of structure that?
Well, 20 people is pretty small, actually, at the end of the day. It has tended to be with everybody. I have one-on-ones with my direct reports for one reason. I have one-on-ones with my other partners for another reason. And then I have one-on-ones with really critical resources at Hinge who are kind of our specialists. They don't necessarily report directly to me, but I need to understand what's challenging them with the deliverables, what's easy with the deliverables, what are they hearing from clients when they're delivering XYZ? What about the pitches? What are they hearing there? I've found that at least for the beginning, I need to have that one-on-one with everybody. And that's a big part of the week.
I imagine that as you transitioned into this role, you've probably been thinking a lot about growth and improvement inside of the company. Not that there was anything wrong with the company before, but just naturally now you have control. There's a lot more that you can kind of get your ideas in more than before. And so I'm wondering, how do you think about growth and just scaling the business? Where are you putting your energy and emphasis? Do you see opportunities in adjusting pricing strategy? Is it sunsetting and kind of removing maybe a certain offering or adding something new? Or is it building the team, going after larger clients? Like, where is your mind right now, kind of present day, when you're thinking about growing the business?
Well, that's a really great question. And I've spent a lot of time talking about that with my other partners, actually. And one of the key decisions we made is to avoid going after new things that we've never tried before. That's hard because Hinge is a very entrepreneurially minded kind of company. And so probably a lot of people on the call can relate to that. And so we have to be very disciplined there and just stick with what we know. That's one thing, is be very disciplined about what we go after. The other thing is just about the people. I mean, I've seen over the years that I've been at Hinge, the employee count has ebbed and flowed, and that's with any company. And one of the difficult and disciplined decisions we needed to make was, what's the core group of people around which we're going to grow? At some point in time, we will need to go back out and hire specialists. And that may be on a contract sort of basis. By the way, that's another habit of high growth firms. They have a core and then they use outside specialists. And I think that's the direction that I see, because that specialized talent is very difficult to attract, retain, and then utilize as much to the percentage that they should be utilized to make it worth it.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, it reaffirms something that I've been kind of thinking about the market, which is, I think for consultants, there's more opportunities than there's ever been before. And probably the pandemic and COVID accelerate a lot of that, just with companies being more kind of willing and open to bring in outside expertise. And I think with the specialists, you get a very high level specialist. If that's a full-time person, it's probably gonna be a very significant investment. Not everybody's willing to make that, and it's not always necessary. Having that ability to tap somebody who has the expertise that you need for when you need it can also add probably to the profitability of the firm, because you're not making necessarily a much larger expenditure or investment right away. So that's really great to hear. Liz, I know we could literally just keep talking for hours on so many different things, but I want to be respectful and conscious of the time that we have in the calendar. I know we also have a few things coming up that we're going to be collaborating on, which I'm excited about. But where should we direct people if they want to learn more about the high growth study or just some of the other studies that you all have? I know some maybe are paid studies, some are free, but just what can you say? Where should we direct people?
Yeah. So I would go to hingemarketing.com, all one word, and go to the library section. And the executive summary of the high growth study is free. You'll see that. I would just download that. And there are also lots of free executive level guides that we have written. So go to hingemarketing.com, libraries and guides, and just peruse it. We aim to write in a very practical way. So people always say, I read that on the 1 hour plane ride that I had today. So do that and connect with me on LinkedIn too and ask me questions.
Fantastic. Well, Liz, thank you again so much for coming on. I always enjoy our conversations, and we'll get all that linked up in the show notes over at consultingsuccess.com. Thanks again.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode between Michael and Liz. If you enjoyed today's podcast, then be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your favorite shows. And if you want to help support the Consulting Success Podcast, I'd encourage you to share this episode out with a colleague. To find the links that were referenced in today's podcast, you can visit Liz's episode page, which you can find over at consultingsuccess.com. Also, a reminder, if you want to work directly with the Consulting Success team, they are offering a free, no-pressure growth session call. To book that call, all you have to do is head over to consultingsuccess.com/grow. That's the end of the line for us this week. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until next time.